Dr. Scott Schmidt, welcome to the How Humans Work podcast. My brother, I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you here. I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for many moons now. And I'm excited to talk about palliative care and the work you do around that and the importance of understanding the palliative care model for everybody, really, everyday person, myself, listeners here. But before we go there, I want to just kind of let the listeners know how close we are and the journey of our friendship and our relationship. Um, so I think it's kind of good to talk about. When I think about it, I think about we've known each other since before kids, you know. So both of our oldest kids are turning 20 this year, and then we've been friends and we've been community members and we've been at some pretty important retreat work together. But I'd say in the last year and a half, our relationships really deepened with some time we spent out in the wilderness, doing some fasting time and some deepening into our conversations about what's going on in our lives. So just invite you to add in what you're moved to say.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Jeffrey. And I think context for a conversation like that, like this, that involves some clarity around who we are to each other is helpful for people that might be interested in listening. And so, yes, I think I would just add, you know, I love you dearly, and I consider you one of my closest friends and one of my allies in this life. And someone who I love spending time with and also deeply respect as a man of integrity, curiosity, depth. So, so yeah, happy to share this with you. And you know, the time that we spent out by the river uh, a while back was and is really important to me and will be for the rest of my life. So thanks for touching that memory and sharing our connection.
Definitely. And I appreciate all that kindness. And I want to maybe just sit with the importance of taking some time to spend some time, as you said, by the river, this beautiful place we found called Hobo Gulch, and a little bit about what that meant for you in the arc of your life to refocus. We've both done, wilderness fasts in the past, and we called to each other like, hey, let's do this, it's needed in our lives. And I know that for me, that it's good to be reminded of opportunities like the one we took. We gave that to our lives. We spent, 3 days fasting by the river, supporting each other, and a longer time around that, preparing and listening to each other. But just to kind of help listeners get to know you, because you said all those beautiful things about me, and I feel mutually equally those things about you. A little bit about, your heart work and what Hobo Gulch meant to you, if you're open to that.
Well, I wasn't expecting that, but sure. Let's see. Heart work. I mean, I think I would say by way of introduction, and I don't know how deeply, frankly, I want to go with that. Still feels pretty close to my own heart and to within our own container of friendship. But what I'll say is that since kind of some brushes with death personally and some connections with people facing death in my earlier life, in my sort of mid 20s, I have sought to meet life in a way that feels meaningful to me personally, that feels connected with the sacredness of this gift of life. And so I have, over that time of 30 plus years, explored different ways of doing that. And so Hobo Gulch, fasting time with you, is an expression of a value that I align with, which is the importance of pausing, reflecting, considering how am I doing, how am I living? Am I living in alignment with how I want to live? Really asking those deep questions about meaning and purpose is something that's really important to me. And I think that inviting those same kinds of questions and taking time out of life, out of routine to prioritize asking those questions either alone or in this case with someone I care deeply about feels good. I mean, beyond just being helpful in terms of realigning and feeling connected to this life, it also just feels deeply nourishing, to my heart and spirit, and I think to hopefully the people that's lives I am connected with and touch. And out of it grew kind of renewed uh, um, orientation towards kindness and love towards myself and others and all beings, and try and find ways to serve in a way that feels interesting uh, and useful. So I think that's as much as I want to share about kind of the details of what we really got into. But does that feel like enough for now?
Absolutely. No, it's beautifully said. I love it because I feel like I love the way you're bringing your values, your thoughts around it, because it's how I know you. This is the level the conversation we have, often a little bit deeper, but that's the territory. And I know you bring that into your work. And so when we were, making the long road trip last summer, we really got to talk about this thing called palliative care. And I thought it was completely fascinating at so many levels to think of life the way that I see you thinking about life through your work, through palliative care. And I knew I wanted to talk with you about it. I knew that this was an important idea, and I knew it fit into systems of knowledge because I know it's not like an official system. It's a model, it's a way of understanding, like, how do we need to be in relationship with the life of our body. So, the story of like what Hobo Gulch meant to you just helps set up for me that sense of like, yeah, Scott's coming at this from a soulful place and as an expression of deep values in his life. And I think that's a really beautiful way to begin the exploration of what palliative care is. So, um, tell me and the listeners, what is palliative care, and why is it important in your mind?
Um, well, palliative care is a specialty in medicine, a subspecialty of medicine that is relatively young amongst the many subspecialties of medicine, but which is aligned, I think, with some of the most ancient approaches to how we navigate serious illness, which is, by gathering all the support um, available to navigate what is often the most difficult experience of being in the human body. So the field itself is really oriented towards caring for people with serious illness through the end of life in a multidisciplinary way that is oriented towards uh, minimizing suffering, maintaining quality of life, and ensuring that at every step along the way that the whole person is tended to, not only the physical body and symptoms that might need to be managed, but also the emotional, psychological, spiritual dimensions of the experience of facing serious illness. So I think that why it's important almost goes without saying if you define it in the way that I've just done. But I think that important to say, and we talked about this a little bit coming into doing this, that palliative care, again, is for people with serious illness through death. And the specialty of palliative care is really kind of holds a place for patients in that navigating that realm of disease and life that are the most complicated. So they're the people for whom the symptom burden is especially high, or the existential challenge of meeting serious illness or death is especially challenging, let's say on a spiritual level, or for patients or families that are having disagreement around what makes sense in terms of treatment as one faces serious illness. So it has become a specialty wherein the people facing those serious illness or death that are the most complicated can get a multidisciplinary team of support. Zooming out to what has become, and so I did that as a hospice doctor for about 7 years. And that was a kind of another story about why and how that all came to be that I don't know if we're going to talk about. But the evolution of this dimension of care in terms of kind of modern times and language being used, began with the hospice movement, which was the very end of life. That then kind of what is the way I see it, that then the shift began to like be a little more upstream to encompass serious illness while people are still pursuing treatment through hospice. So hospice is the very final stages of palliative care where individuals are really focusing only on comfort and not life prolongation. Palliative care can include a simultaneous attending to maximizing, comfort and quality of life while pursuing life prolonging treatments. But the dimension that is now kind of what I see to be the next kind of evolution in this realm is what is known as primary palliative care, which is a term that some people like and others don't. But what it speaks to is the role of all providers, all healthcare providers, all human beings, frankly, in helping one another to navigate serious illness for patients and families facing it. That is to have palliative care competencies for the non-specialist. So my work in more recent years has been more focused on shifting culture around kind of framing what it is that many, if not most of us, already have been doing for our whole careers, but haven't really oriented to quite in this way, nor put energy into skill development related to helping people through this in quite that way. And so there's a shift happening wherein the understanding more broadly is that we all have a role. We healthcare professionals all have a role in helping patients and families navigate serious illness. And that could be anything from being clear about the disease they're facing and their prognosis in language that makes sense to them, to helping them determine a treatment plan that is aligned with what's important to them, and or connecting them with other systems of care to support them in serious illness, among which could be specialty palliative care, for example. I'll refer to that. Or it might be they need some home social work support, or let us connect you up with spiritual care services, for example. So that's a lot, but that's kind of a bit about the breadth of what we're talking about. And it even kind of can even go more upstream in it with advanced care planning and beginning to think, gosh, if something happened to me that was irreversible and I couldn't speak for myself, who would speak for me, for example? What are my values around that? So I don't think we want to go too into that
Oh,
right
I
now.
think that's actually, I do want to go there because I think, I don't know what percentage of the population is in a palliative care specialty level of health right now, but I'm not, right? So I had that feeling when we were talking last summer about it that, oh, actually I have a relationship to the ideas in palliative care right now. And there's some important things for me to even begin to start considering right now. And the other side of that is this felt sense of like, whoa, okay, so the medical system is going to get cohesive, or it's going towards a more cohesive sense that like they see me on the journey of my life and their role is a cohesive support system that's not just fractured or fragmented into different specialties or even just sharing data, but is a deeper understanding of my humanity. And that I'm in the middle of this, and that's an important aspect to the medical or the healing or the health relationship. So I'm going to add those two things in and let you kind of build off that. How you respond? Yeah.
Well, I'll start with the latter and then put the question back to you about the
Yeah.
former regarding kind of what it brings up for you as someone who's healthy, not facing serious illness. But to start with the latter, I would say we aspire to that. I think we are aspiring to shift a culture in medicine around whole person care, person-centered care, which is really at the heart of this notion of palliative care. It's like, hey, Jeffrey, this is what you're facing. given what I've told you, what's important? How can I support you through this? What are your priorities? What are your hopes? What are your fears and worries? So, yeah, I think a more kind of what I would describe as an eye for, an ear for, a heart for throughout a person's journey in the human body from wellness to death, keeping track of how we're communicating what's real in language that works for them, what's true, and
Medically true. Like,
yeah, about what they're facing.
yeah,
And within the context of that, what's important? How do we maintain an eye on that? As we provide the treatments, because those conversations are critical, and also they, in terms of resources spent, time spent, etc., can sometimes be a small part. Like I can have a conversation with someone who says, I really want to do X, Y, or Z, but then it becomes a huge effort for the family then to rally caregiving, for example, to get some medical equipment because the patient now wants to stay home. Or let's say they understand they're facing their cancer and yet they want to pursue aggressive chemotherapy, even though it can't be curative. That launches them down a trajectory of care that's going to include months to years of effort within, let's say, oncology, through which there's going to be this ongoing through line, hopefully, of how's it going? How is this treatment working for you? Do you continue to tolerate the treatments? Does the burden of the treatment still feel worthwhile, given that what we hope to do at best is to prolong life some? Does that continue to make sense for you? So, yeah, I don't know if I would use the word cohesive, but I would say to consistently be considering, what matters most to people as they navigate the different peaks and valleys of healthcare and the ultimate decline towards death. So that's, yeah, we aspire to that, and it's hard. Working in modern medicine is really, really hard, and there are so many pieces of information floating around, and there are a lot of complicated agendas and feelings about how this should be done or by whom. So it's a journey, and I'm on it and doing my best to support it. And I would say that we do aspire to that. So anyway, getting back to and so
that's
does that make,
great. No, it's
yeah.
great.
How about sharing a bit when you said as a healthy person, understanding kind of some of these aspects of what lives out there in this evolving landscape of serious illness care, both upstream and during. What does that bring up for you
That's
as a
great.
healthy person or as
Yeah.
a family member to healthy people?
First, it's very grounding and very honest to start to think of my life as okay. There's a good possibility that decline, or 100% possibility that decline is going to be there unless I get struck dead suddenly in health, right? So that's there. And so how do I need to be considering that now? And the idea that okay, advanced medical directives, power of attorney, that those are conversations that being aware of and honest with the body, right? So I guess what I would say is, feeling healthy, it feels like it's not going to happen, right? But the truth is, it is going to happen in some way for me. It's going to happen some way for everybody, and to participate in that, and the opportunity to start thinking about that and preparing for that, and planning for that, not um not like with macabre is not the word I'm thinking of, but with like glum or a darkness about it, but with just an honesty and a realness and a groundedness around it. So I think that's what came up for me last summer is, oh, right. I see the destiny or the fate of my body, and that's part of it. And it just was provocative, and it was inviting, and it was okay, this primary palliative care values and philosophy, which I think is really beautiful, also matters to me. I mean, I don't have to wait to have a chronic illness to engage in the understanding that I need to be prepared or think about what my values are in relationship to what's worth living, what's not worth living for me, what treatments I want, what treatments I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a couple of reflections on that. I personally believe that thinking about these things actually enriches life. It gives me a chance to say, to be very honest with myself. Oh, my body now at 58 doesn't work as seamlessly as it did when I was 38. I have pain. I can't do so. I can, easily just get stuck there, but I can also shift a little bit into, okay, how do I then live in a way that feels meaningful with these changes in my life? And then it gives me like a shift, this idea of given what I'm facing, how then do I want to live? What's important? It for me, there's like a shift in kind of myopia. Is that the word? Like a
Now that, yeah,
narrow focus
yeah.
on, oh, this is so hard, to like, okay, this is true. What else is true? What else do I want to think about right now? So that's how I think of it in terms of like a day-to-day change. I think then kind of like more, meta, to be saying, hey, I'm basically healthy. I'm not taking any medications. I'm healthy. And as you put it, most of us, the overwhelming majority of us, will face decline toward death. We will have some sort of chronic or progressive illness. So an awareness of that brings a greater like gratitude for health right now, and a sobriety around, not taking it for granted. And then it comes then, but beyond that, for me, beyond that, you can't really guess out what that progressive illness is going to be. And so I think that an important piece here, and we touched on this the other day when we were talking, is to go into whatever it is we're facing with a kind of approach, like a thoughtful way of considering what we're learning about, let us say, a new serious illness. And I would say before one can really say, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to deal with this, we need information. We need to understand, for people who know the landscape best, our oncologists, for example, or a geriatrician if we're, over 80 and starting to have some memory lapse, that understand what we're facing and can say it in terms that we understand. And then we, all of us, need to be able to say, okay, find a way to come to terms with that emotionally, do whatever processing we need to do to then be able to cognitively process what matters most. What would be acceptable to me? What at this current state, as I imagine this new information, would not be acceptable to me? And what would I want to try, explore? What are the endpoints? What after a period of, let's say, a certain kind of treatment, when do I want to check it in? Is it 2 weeks, 4 months? I don't know. So we have to have a thoughtful approach to asking, I think, our healthcare providers, hey, what can I really expect on the road ahead with this? What does it, usually look like? Um, and then to, ask them, you know, serious questions about, like, what's the worst case scenario here? What happens when this goes poorly? And how do I how do I know when to check in with you again, doctor, about how this is going, where we go from here? Because often, and I know I'm kind of riffing in a different direction than you pointed us initially, but often people get started on a road of treatment, and well, maybe we better do this other procedure now, and oh, it'll just be a short stay in the intensive care unit, and we'll try and get things tuned up, and well, it'll only be, it might just be a couple weeks in the nursing facility, and then next thing someone who has at one point said, I would never want to live in a nursing home, is in a nursing home. And so we have to, I think, as lay people, I would encourage lay people, and I know we talked about this, to really actually grab hold of the reins of the decision making, of the asking, as you're navigating serious illness, so that you know so you have sovereignty, self-governance over, like, your care and your death ultimately, to the extent that's possible.
Yeah.
Couple things. I know I kind of went off on a little riff there, but
No, I love it. I love it because I could feel you thinking, and I see the two sides of it, which we've spoken about. One side is like, what are people who are in the health experience, what are they doing? And the other side is the medical system. And I used the word cohesive earlier, and I think you said aspirational, and I understand that to mean that if it's cohesive, it means it's all working and taken care of. And maybe it's, you don't have to ask questions. And I think what you're really advocating is we do have to ask questions, and we do have to stay present, and and we do need to think about our values in the health journey. That's how I'm understanding that. But I know that you also created, and maybe this is a good time to talk about this project called the Respect Project, that might help illuminate some of the values around the palliative care model that you put together to help doctors. I don't know. Does that seem like a good place to expand and expound on the
You
work?
share that? I mean, I think that's an example of a structure that speaks to a lot of what we're talking about. And so, but before I go there, I just want to get back to that cohesiveness point. I think there's a common misconception that medical decision making and so forth can almost be, I think it can be oversimplified in either healthcare providers' minds or patient and families' minds. I think there always have to be questions, and they have to be asked again and again and again. So here's where you are today, Jeffrey. What's important? A year from now, it looks like actually the cancer has spread and we're not going to be able to get you better. Now, what's important? The questions have to keep coming, and they have to keep coming from both sides. So I just want to say that the cohesiveness is not so much of like, this is how it's done, is more like, let's be curious together about how to do this, how to face this. The Respect Project is something that I created in kind of end of 2013. But I think backing up just to speak to a little bit of the arc of my work and
Yeah.
how that ended up even being a thing, to just briefly say, you know, during residency, I knew that I had a kind of resonance with patients and families facing death or serious illness that continued through the first 10 years of just being purely an emergency medicine doctor. But I began to feel that I wanted to diversify. I was beginning to get a little burned out. And along that journey was a consistent experience again and again and again of patients with very advanced illness, very late stage illness, non-communicative, bed-bound patients with end-stage dementia living in nursing homes my hand was being forced to aggressively try and resuscitate because adequate conversations of the type that we're discussing here had not happened. And I was struggling with that while also getting tired of just doing emergency medicine. So I sought a diversification of work that led to becoming a hospice doctor, which is, I could say more about, but I did that for a number of years working.
Say a little bit more about hospice work, and because and it's one of the things I recognize in you is that capacity to be with end of life and death issues with people with the hospice.
Well, so I think, as I said, there were many reasons and also, family stuff and my mom's terminal illness that led to just like this kind of like, man, I feel connected to this dimension of life, the very end of life, and working in that space with people and personally is interesting to me. And so I began to open my lens to look for opportunities for where I might do that outside of the emergency room, and ended up doing a year-long training in contemplative approaches to death and dying through what was then known as the Meta Institute. And during that time, stepped in as a part-time hospice doctor for a colleague who was doing some other non-medical work elsewhere. So anyway, I segued in and sort of trained up to work in hospice. And so, it's obviously that dimension of life and death, and it's multidisciplinary. It is a field of equals, in my opinion, of chaplains, nurses, social workers, doctors, home health aides, all working together to support people facing arguably the hardest, moment, the ultimate rite of passage of death. So I loved the model. I loved the experience of working with a team and kind of supporting each other to support others. And so I started doing a little bit of it and gradually did more, and was doing that kind of in parallel with emergency medicine for 7 years. And then at the end of that is when I decided, working at 3 different places, it was not working for me. So I chose to take a job with Kaiser and sort of pitch the leadership there. Hey, I have this kind of multi-specialty background. Can you provide me some administrative support to do some program development where in the territory where hospice end of life work overlaps with emergency medicine? And people used to joke that, if it didn't go well in the ER, I could kind of pick things up on the other side, which was, of course, a dark bit of humor, which is always welcome in these realms. But so that, I could say more about hospice, but it was, honestly, I think it was the most satisfying work I've ever done in my life, working with patients, families in their homes, and then working with the teams away from the homes to try and kind of, figure out how to support people. And when I segued into these other roles, there was, I think, an equally meaningful and very different dimension of work that could have like a ripple out effect, that by doing program development or teaching or leading in other ways, that there may be others that then would have a wider influence to impact how people navigating serious illness and death were cared for. So I chose that direction, for the last 12 years or so. That's how we got here today. But I don't know if is there anything else you wanted to ask about hospice, or should I say it,
Well,
kind of
yeah,
summarize?
no, I kind of want to hang out there for a minute, at least with the exposure to death. And I started flashing on when my own dad died, and the spiritual experience. I think it's probably the one true spiritual experience I've had. I don't know if I've ever told you this moment, but when he passed, it was Scottsdale, Arizona, 2003. And he was gone. He left. He stopped breathing. I felt an energy come into me that I knew to be him. And I just started crying super hard, started sobbing. And it was interesting thing, because when my dad told me that he was with his father when he died, he felt his spirit come into him. And as a child, I imagined that was they were holding hands and somehow something happened. So I had this ongoing question in my mind, like what would happen at the moment when he passed? Like, would I feel something? And I did, much to my surprise. And it was way more overwhelming and profound than I can really describe with words. But there was a sense that he moved either through me or dissolved into me. And so I became, as you were talking about the hospice journey and the end of life moments, just kind of curious about what you've witnessed in terms of the spirituality of dying and the soul thing. Like, is that common? Do you hear people talking about those kind of moments when you're in that field? Is that yeah, is that common?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sitting with what you just shared, and also do recall you sharing that with me once before, and just feel right now happy for you that you're able to have that experience at the time of your father's death. I think it's an incredible gift that many people are not able to have or receive for a variety of reasons, and um, not the least of which is talking about the great mystery here. I don't know. I don't know how it works. I was with my father when he died. I didn't have an experience like that. Um, and so I think what I will say is, being near death and families facing death, being near death in my own household, each of my parents instills you know, deep for me, deep reverence and deep humility in the face of the unknowable person. You know, we can only really hold our own experience with as much awareness as we possibly can and hold that of others with as much um, open-heartedness and acceptance, welcoming as we possibly can. And that's no simple thing. So, I think what I would say is that, the hospice work, I stopped doing that in 2012. So it's quite a while ago. What I can say, no kind of specific thing is coming immediately to mind right now. But what I would say is it was a relatively small percentage of families and patients that were able to really drop into those kind of deep questions of connection, spirituality, meaning, because of the overwhelm of coming to terms with the death was actually coming. And so this, I will say, has been part of the inspiration for why I have sought to support people to actually know what they're facing a little earlier, because I think that there's a real opportunity, a real life gift that that is sometimes available as death comes, as death is approached. And for the people that have experienced it, and I have had versions of this personally with my own loved ones. I've just heard another, expression of your experience like that, and I've heard many, many others. For the people that have those experiences of connection with their loved ones in whatever way it that feels authentic to them, um, they are moved. They never forget these experiences. They hold them, they cherish them in their hearts till their own deaths. And so I feel completely committed to, like, wherever possible, allowing space for those things to come and have room to be, expressed and then talked about. So yeah, I guess those are my reflections on that. I think that dimension of experience is, I think, within the world of hospice providers, absolutely comfortable landscape to move through with patients and families, I would say. In the realm of, emergency medicine, in a fast-paced environment where that unfolds, the readiness to go there on any provider's part is usually undermined by the conditions in which these things are unfolding. So the more that we can support family and members to actually grab hold of their own experience, I think, and say, hey, doc, can you give us a minute? Can we get some privacy to process this? If the doc is somehow not able to see the need for that, the more likely families are to have these incredibly poignant experiences that you've just described. So yeah, those are a few reflections on that
Yeah.
question.
Thank you so much. So beautifully said. Um, so I love we're back in the heart. We kind of started there with the soul and your arc of your work and the kind of calling here. And I want to lift up a little bit. I want to lift back up to, okay, that's it. That's it. That's the advocacy. That's the kind of opportunity that's there. And then the structure that you created, which we started talking about the Respect Project as in the arc of your, development out of ER and hospice and kind of like, hey, here's an opportunity to advocate for this kind of stuff. And my sense is that when I heard it, I was like, that's really cool. That's really great. And I get it's, some one model. It's not the be all end all of primary palliative inspirations, but would you be open to sharing it?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So when I transitioned into kind of working at one work site and got some support to do some program development, I just really asked myself at that point. I was, over about 17 years as an ED doc, and no, more, and had done, 7 years of hospice doctoring. And I said, kind of what's needed, based on a lot of the things we've talked about right now.
Yeah.
And what came was the Respect Project. And what it is again a kind of a multidisciplinary approach to the very end of life. And it has two different limbs. One is for patients with very advanced illness who are imminently dying. So again, it's the very end of life, and it applies to the patients for whom the values and goals are such that the focus is actually dying with dignity and minimal suffering. They are at the very end of life, and their focus is comfort focus only. Okay. So these are patients that are expected to die within hours to days, that have had a conversation or previously expressed, hey, I'm at a place where I want to be allowed to die naturally, and I would love to be supported with as little, suffering as possible. So it's for patients actively dying who want comfort for focus only. That's one limb of the project. So within that is embedded the need for the physician to conduct a conversation to explore those goals. Not only to identify, to basically have a conversation, goals of care conversation, we call them. And so once it's determined that someone has comfort focus only and they're imminently dying, we move toward the comfort care protocol part of the Respect Project, which involves a few different things. Firstly, and we'll come back to this, placing a visual cue on the door to the patient's room that lets everyone in the department know what's going on in the room so that they can check themselves and be fully present when they enter the room. They understand someone is dying in that room. And there's a certain way that in the busyness of an ER where one person's got an ear infection and someone else is dying, you have to try and shift gears. So the visual was part of that. And I can show you that in a second if you want to see it. So it involves a visual, it involves an order set, which is deployed by any discipline, doctor, nurse, or emergency department tech, that involves non-pharmacologic interventions to promote comfort, to minimize suffering, that range anything from very common sense things like chairs for the family, food for the family, offering to call clergy, temperature regulation, a lot of really common sense things that in the heat of the moment are sometimes, yeah. And there's the visual, there's the order set, and then there's the pharmacologic interventions for comfort. If someone's having a lot of suffering related to difficulty breathing or pain, for example, then we use medications to minimize suffering. So that's the comfort care part of it. And then the name of the project comes from the Respect acronym, what I call it, practice tool, which is things to remember when someone has died. Either they're comfort care and they died in the emergency department, or they died of some other sudden or unexpected cause. And it talks through kind of an approach to things to think about, try and remember. So this is what we put on the door to people that are actively dying or have died. Mm. It was created by a colleague. I kind of did Sharpies, and he was a graphic designer. And God, I'm embarrassed. I'm forgetting Paul's last name right now, so I can't say it. But he was the partner of a close colleague. Anyway, so he was the artist that created this, and so this goes on the door. On the back of it are all of these kind of interventions that are non-pharmacologic, and then this acronym Respect. And we can briefly touch on it, but the R is for restore order, and that comes from knowing that the visage of your loved one after they've died will stay with you. And so we want to minimize trauma. We want to clean blood. We want to try the resuscitation suite can be a scary place. And if you're not familiar with that, the blood and vomit and the way that the body looks after death and resuscitation can be horrifying for people. And we learned this, and as I was developing this, through a lot of stories that colleagues heard from patients and families saying how distraught they were to see their loved one covered in blood after they had died. So the R is for restore order. The E stands for explain things in language that people can understand. The S is stop and set aside other things, which is common sense, but doesn't necessarily happen. So I will hand someone my phone and say, hey, I got to go and be with this family for a few minutes. And the P stands for be present, which is, kind of the other side of that coin, which is, hey, let's check ourselves. Someone just died. Let's go and sit with that family. And some people argue for something that's known as the pause, which is to say, even at the time of death, with the team that was doing the resuscitation, hey, this is not someone that we personally know, but this person had a life. They had parents that loved them, family or friends. We really can't know. May they rest in peace. We've done our best to treat them with respect and dignity, and take a moment. And so that's just the P is kind of around that part. And E is the kind of obvious need for expressing empathy in response to emotion and the importance of that. And C is to remind us that many people have a real deep relationship to spirituality. And so chaplain clergy is what C is about. And T is about time, allowing patients and family as much time as they need, giving them the space and time to process after the death has occurred. And the T is also has its other meaning to take care of yourself, take care of ourselves, and to check in with one another. So anyway, I don't know if you wanted to go through that
Oh,
one.
that's good.
That's
I
that's what.
like it, and it's right when my dad died. It was like the nurses were at the door because they were hustling to confirm that he had died, and we had no time, had no time for a sense of just giving us a minute, even 10 minutes, even 20 minutes, just to sit there. So we were pretty like moved out pretty quickly out of that hospital at that time. So that's really beautiful, and I think it's important and evocative, and I really do appreciate the creativity that is in it, but also the voice and the spirit and the relationship about, okay, yeah, this needs to be cared for in these ways, and this is what we can do on our end to help that, help people. That's great.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, these are in many ways so common sense, but also so deep, and being present with a family at the time of death is no simple thing. It's no simple thing to witness suffering. And I think that it's understandable that people that are in the caring professions might want to do that, but be challenged. And so, how do we create, I think, opportunities for people to really think about that, reflect on that, maybe do some skill development in that area?
Well, you're getting close to what my interest and passion is about this dynamic of stress in life and the different ways it manifests. And I know, maybe we're really close to it in terms of the load of being in a high intensity caring role, like, being in a emergency department, emergency medicine, and how hard it is to make state shifts, to shift states from, ear infection to, somebody passing away, and maybe in a really under difficult circumstances. And I also know that, like, it's a load, right? It's been a load from COVID, it's a load even before then, and there's all these kind of deep encounters. My medicine's very different. My medicine's very, very chillaxed compared to, being in an emergency department. It's paced, it's rarely crisis. Recently I had a session that went awry, and somebody knee was in the wrong position, and I needled them. They had really knees that are unhealthy and need a lot of care, but they got worse. They walked out worse, and they walked out in distress, and I was wrecked over it, and it really, really, really bothered me. It was really, really hard on me, and I felt really, really terrible, and I had to process it, and I'd work with my parts, and I had to kind of figure out, how do I hold this? How do I hold myself in this? How do I hold a sense of agency, responsibility, care, all those things, right? And I know that that loads really true in your zone too. And I guess, you know, maybe the thing to know is for people who are listening to understand, like it's hard to sometimes see the police officer's perspective. Maybe it's sometimes hard to see the doctor's perspective of what they're holding in their role. And maybe that without it like being a complaint or a gripe, just a real honest thing, like what it's like sometimes and what it's holds so people can see, you know, the humanity on the other side of the medical situation. Yeah. You open to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, I think kind of a couple things come to mind to say. When I was rolling this project out, there was a lot of kind of polarity in the response to kind of what was invited that um, I think was very human. You know, it transcended like I mean, it was this overlap between humanity and what's, you know, challenging about being a human with role and hey, what exactly is my job? And that's really, I think, what is so hard about being a healthcare provider is often it is messy. It's very, very messy. And people have their own old past experiences or traumas. They have opinions about how things should be. They have, you know, impressions of the healthcare provider and energetic exchanges that are happening based on lots of different complexities. And the healthcare provider brings the same burden to this interaction. So, you know, my work has been, hey, let's try to set that aside and kind of resonate with the deeper, meaningful opportunity to connect as human beings beyond all those things in this moment of navigating a new serious diagnosis or considering questions about life or death. And I still align with the opportunity there. And that's a kind of a preamble to say, it is hard. It is so damn hard to really like set it all aside and pause and connect with my full presence and heart with someone facing that when I have 8 other patients I'm caring for, when I literally every shift literally cannot meet the needs. I can never meet all the needs that were presented to me when I work a shift. And that sucks. That feels bad. And that causes moral distress. If I had more time, if there were more time, if I were smarter, if I were more loving, I could have done better, you know, and that is the burden that we carry as healthcare providers, most of us. So yeah, it's a very real thing. And I think understandably, doctors that work in the emergency department all the time are like, wait a minute, you're telling me to actually pause and ask someone what matters? And the answer is yes, I'm asking, you know, and also I'm encouraging the lay community to ask also. And yes, we understand. And I will say, I can't, I fail every time. I fail all the time. It's a humbling journey to try and be the best doctor you can be, the most kind, respectful, skillful, knowledgeable doctor you can be, because there's no end to those wells. Like any of those different adjectives I described, you know, have really a lot of range in terms of what we're able to manifest. And that range varies depending on my stress level, on what is being asked of me during a given workday. And so, what I would offer is that for the sake of everyone involved, like keeping our lenses open for those moments of grace. You know, it's 15 seconds of like you share a laugh, you share a smile, you share a connection. I'm able to say to you that I care. I'm able to share with you what you're facing in a way that you perceive as delivered with care. And try where we can to give people the benefit of the doubt. Try in our ways to, just as physicians, techs, nurses, or social workers, we're all doing our best. Everyone's trying so hard to do the right thing. And I think, you know, finding opportunities to have that generosity of heart front and center, along with our other needs, along with our other curiosities, like, how long do you think it'll be? And what am I facing here? And so forth. But also, like, oh, this person is really busy and they're also taking care of me. That's beautiful. So, yeah. And I think that those are a couple of reflections on that. I don't know where else to go with it, but I guess what I will say is that modern medicine is a hard place to work. It's a very hard place to work. And I often hear patients complain of how short my time with them is. Their primary care doctors only meet with them for 15 minutes. And I ask when there seems to be an opportunity, do you think we like it that way? Do you really think that we want to rush you out of the room? Hell no. It's just we have co-created a system that exists this way. And so I believe that the more we can actually do our own work, you know, as individuals, not get triggered, I can be more spacious when I take care of someone. As lay people, taking care of our minor stuff, having our questions queued up, emotionally preparing ourselves, for difficult news and taking care of our emotional bodies as we navigate serious illness. The more we can do our own work in those ways, then those short connections will be more productive, and I think meaningful for everyone involved. But again, that's aspirational.
Yeah, no, beautifully said. I appreciate your advocacy so much for what is possible. Not that we're going to hit it every time, but how it can be and how we can be with these very hard and sober issues, and just the experience and the insight and the wisdom and the love and the heart and the intentionality that you carry as a human advocating for humanity inside this, these conditions, these medical conditions, these medical situations. So I always admire you, but I just even admire you more deeply for what you have to say here on the show. I guess before we say goodbye, thank you for being on and all that good stuff. Just wondering if there's anything that you want to say in closing. After everything we've said, anything you're feeling.
Um, it feels like such a treat to speak with you about things that I care about. And what I feel is, um, I feel humble. I feel humbled by the conversation. I feel like these notions, these aspirations are so big, and so I say to myself, I say to all of us, go easy. You know, we're showing up as best we can for all of these opportunities to be together, to be with what we're facing, to provide care, to receive care. And so I just feel in this moment humbled by just how big it all is, by the mystery of this gift of life, and how we navigate kind of the inevitable end of it. So, yeah, thanks for the conversation. And
So welcome. Thank you, man. So good to dive into it and carry the spirit forward of our time out in the wilderness into this format, and just deepen into the work you're doing. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for thinking and caring and having walked the life of medicine, and gone through the hard things so you can say these things and offer wisdom and teaching. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you, brother, for hosting and doing this, putting it out there, putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
Love it.